Introduction to microservices. If you haven't been involved in the development of a microservices-based system, this is an important lecture for you. Microservices-based systems are normally compared to monolithic applications. When people and companies started building applications, they built them in a monolithic way. In a monolithic application, all the services and functionalities are in a big chunky application. For example, if an application had shopping cart, payment, product listing, and all those functionalities, they were all coded into one single application. Obviously, if you were to change any of these services, you would have to deploy the entire application. And if any part of the code crashed, the entire application would crash. So some architects tried to make this better, and they came up with service-oriented architecture, also known as SOA. In service-oriented architecture, they broke the monolithic application into smaller services. For example, shopping cart service, payment service, order service. Services would talk to each other via APIs, application programming interfaces, and they normally use SOAP APIs. Services also could maintain a session, so we call them stateful services. And because they communicated via APIs, they were highly dependent on each other. So to make this even better, microservices architecture was invented. So again, services were separated, and then services communicated with each other mainly via events, messages, or RESTful APIs. In an event-driven microservices architecture, we try to minimize the use of APIs. And if we use APIs, we normally use RESTful APIs. And microservices are stateless. They don't maintain session. And because they talk to each other or they communicate with each other via events and messages mainly, then the amount of dependency is quite low. So in a monolithic application, there would normally be a user interface, and normally user interface also would be part of the big chunky application. And again, normally it would be rendered on the server side, for example, like a PHP website or something like that. And then all the services would be also in that application, like cart service, payment service, order service. Normally we would put them somewhere called business tier or business layer. And the entire application also would have a big database. In the service-oriented architecture, again, we had the user interface, and then we had separate services. The services would talk to each other via SOAP APIs. Also, normally, there would be one big database as well. And basically, different services could access the tables of other services. So they had dependency at the data level, which is not good. In microservices architecture, user interface is normally only client side. For example, it's written in pure JavaScript, like React or Angular, something like that. It's normally not rendered on the server side. And then you have individual services, and every service has its own database. They don't share the database. And when they need to use each other's API, they use a RESTful API, and mainly we prefer to use events or messages rather than APIs.